What's up, guys? Sorry I started late. I scheduled this for 9:45. I was being optimistic, but I was procrastinating earlier when I went to work out. So that's what was the holdup. Um, Originally, I was going to go to happy hour, then decided, don't want to go to happy hour on Monday, especially as I had already gotten up late because it's a holiday sort of. Well, Easter Monday is a holiday for those of the Orthodox faith. But rest in peace, by the way, to Pope Francis, uh, who died today on Easter Monday of all days. Um, Although, Roman Catholics celebrate Easter on Sunday, Easter Monday is still of some import in the Catholic tradition, I believe, although it's the Eastern Orthodox that celebrates Easter specifically on Monday. But in any case, it was kind of sad hearing the Pope died on Easter Monday. But uh, yeah, so you know, I decided to do this topic because of stuff that I've been seeing on the news with the New York Times talking about ADHD and with my own experiences and my background in psychology. So I was like, this could be an interesting topic. So I'm going to do that. um, and I might be snacking throughout this live while I do this. So keep that in mind. Um, for those watching this on who will be watching this on replay, since there's no one currently in the chat room as you can see, but for those watching this on replay, if you leave comments, please don't ask me any questions about. Well, don't in the comments. Please don't ask me health advice. I am not a a board certified licensed practicing psychologist. I do have a background in scientific psychology, and I do have my experiences in mental health, uh, dealing with my own as well as others. So I do know things, but I am not here to give professional advice. Please seek professional help if you need it. So I just wanted to give that proviso uh, as we get started. Okay. So again, not I cannot give professional advice, so please don't ask me any professional advice. I'm here to sort of give a critique of some aspects of the mental health world. Looking at, like I said, the recent article in the New York Times talking about ADHD being mostly a social contagion, and I agree with that. And I'm going to say why, and I'm going to talk about clinical depression as well, the mental health industry in general. Um, and this is going to border on, you know, my experiences as well as academic background and things like scientific psychology, clinical psychology, cognitive science, um, the mental health industry, and the skepticism movement. Okay. Um, and there's a lot of things related to that. Let me set my chat filter so I can get my messages. And again, guys, uh, I'm not here to give professional advice to anyone, so please don't come here asking me mental health questions of your own, like of things you're dealing with. I would strongly advise you to go seek professional help if you have such questions. Also, if you do have general questions, please pay me for my time by dropping a super chat or a cash app or buy me a coffee. Pay me for my time, and I will give you the best answers I can with my due diligence. Okay. Um, that being said, again, we're going to get right into it. So again, the New York Times about a week ago released the article criticizing the ADHD diagnosis, and, um, and, 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 it's been a long time coming because there's been a lot of skepticism about this disorder for a long time within um, the mental health world, the mental health community. Um, and you don't necessarily have to have the hyperactive part. There are different types of ADHD. There's one where it's mostly dealing with the inattentiveness. Then there's um, another type dealing with mostly the hyperactive component. Then there's like a third type, which is sort of like a sort of a mixed type. And then there was the fourth disorder, which is the one that's the most contentious, which is adult ADD. There's a lot, there's evidence showing that adult ADD may not be a genuine diagnosis. Okay. Um, and one of the issues with ADHD, again, is that we don't really have a neurobiological component to go with this disorder. Actually, this is a flaw in many psychiatric disorders, by the way, which gives rise to some skepticism about them. Because on some level, we do believe that most psychiatric disorders have a neuropsychological component. Where that is missing, there should be due skepticism whether these are genuine disorders, right? Um, Let me get one of my Pockies here. Pockies, Japanese snack. Got a little Pocky cookies and cream. Um, there is a rise of diagnoses of ADHD, which has given rise also to more uh, scrutiny on that disorder. For one, we don't see a strong, again, biomedical component to it or neurobiological. What's up, Carlton? Uh, so a lot of kids, particularly boys, are diagnosed with ADHD, and it is not a coincidence that there are less male teachers teaching primary schools than there used to be. The feminization of education has led to a more intolerance with typical young male behavior. To assume that kids should be able to sit their butts in a chair for 8 hours, it's kind of unrealistic, especially for boys. Especially since a lot of education has gotten rid of gym. In elementary school, the way that you got a lot of kids to behave, particularly boys, is you had gym and you had recess. Between gym and recess, we got to get all of our physical activity out. Like during recess, we're typically playing kickball, basketball, football, maybe soccer, baseball, softball, stuff like that, tetherball, just having fun. Then in gym, you're doing a little more of the same, but in a more structured way, learning the rules and such. Um, and you know, because less schools, because many schools have cut funding for excuse me for arts and music and physical education. Especially, this happened particularly in the 2000s under George W. Bush, where there was an increased emphasis on looking at standardized tests, which wasn't a problem. The problem was that a lot of these less funded schools took most of the budget that they had and put it towards teaching towards these tests, and they took funding away from arts and humanities and physical education and put it to just math and English, maybe history. And as a result, a lot of these kids were less well rounded in their education. Like again, I'm the standardized tests weren't the, having an emphasis on the standardized test wasn't wrong. The problem was how it was meted out to take to take resources away from music and art and gym and put it only towards you know the formal studies of like math, literature, grammar, and history was wrongheaded, right? We saw a continuation of the same during the Obama administration, but he tried to correct for the mistakes of the previous administration, where all these public schools, again the less funded ones, um, had to make some budgetary decisions and took away things that kids did had like. And even when I was in school in the 80s and 90s, like we still didn't get some of the stuff that my parents got. Like people like some of you Gen Zers and millennials wouldn't know, like well, unless you watch like old TV shows from like the or movies from the 70s and 80s. High school used to prepare you directly into going into the working world. I know this is a tangent. Trust me, I'm cooking. I'm gonna bring this back to where I to you know what I was talking about originally. So in high school, they got tech ed, home ec. So yes, they learned how to balance a checkbook and they learned how to cook. And they got driver's ed in high school. Now, when I was in high school, the big thing was going to Sears to go to the driving school. Like everyone couldn't wait to go to driving school at Sears, right? Like that was and that kind of defeats the, and that gets into what I'm talking about, the ADHD, which is the problem with how they would think that just because the kids couldn't pay attention that they had an attention deficit. No, the thing of the matter is when people aren't interested in something, they easily get bored with it. Duh, that's not a psychiatric disorder. But it wasn't because they couldn't stay still. It's because hello, they found what they were learning boring. Um, but you took those same kids to that Sears driving school, and they were completely attentive for that 2 or however many hours we were there every day for that driver's ed course, because we all knew, especially the guys, we all knew this was the pathway to sex. Like we knew driver's ed equals driver's license, which equals car, which equals girls. And even the girls were happy to be there because they saw the driver's license as a pathway to getting a car, to having freedom from being out the house. So you wanted to see attentive kids. You wanted to see attentive kids. Send them to driver's ed, and you saw the most attentive kids you've ever seen in your life, unless you were in that AP course. So I told you I was going to cook this right. So getting back to ADHD, so we kind of just turned everything that kids do into something a disorder, and it's not. Being bored with formal studies is not a psychiatric problem. It's a issue of motivation. But to put kids on medication for it is wrongheaded. And again, along with the rise of ADHD diagnoses in younger children, particularly males, was a rise in it in college kids. And you know why? Because college kids knew that they would get prescribed drugs that are speed. Ritalin and Adderall are forms of speed, particularly Adderall. Adderall is definitely a form of speed. Ritalin is a synthetic form, okay, of methamphetamines, of amphetamines. Adderall is an amphetamine. Ritalin is a synthetic form of amphetamine. And so a lot of people in college purposely go out to try to get diagnosed for that just so they can get access to Ritalin or Adderall to use to to focus to for school. Even more so, like 12, 13 years ago, what started replacing Ritalin and Adderall was something called Provigil. Provigil is the most it's the closest thing that we'll have to a real life version of 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 the drug that Bradley Cooper was using in that movie called I forgot. Chad, if you can remind me the name of that movie where he was using that drug that made him super smart. Well, Provigil is like a real life counterpart to that. It doesn't do exactly what it did in the movie, but it's very close to it. It's called Provigil. Originally, it was prescribed to people who suffer from narcolepsy, but they found that it also worked for shift work, what's called shift work disorder. Shift work disorder is for basically people who work overnight, and as such, it messes up their sleeping patterns. So people could get prescribed this Provigil as a way to be able to allow them to stay up. Okay, so kids started complaining. Well, college kids started complaining that they suffer from uh, shift like a shift work disorder because of school, and were getting this prescribed. This became really popular like 12, 13 years ago. Um, but yeah, so college kids have always been looking for an edge when it comes to studying, and sometimes, what's up, Kat? And sometimes, as such, they will willingly, get into psychoactive medications to do such. Even my own professors, like when I in my philosophy department, told me they used to crush Ritalin when they were in grad school and use it to stay up and study all night. My professor said this, like they were openly talking about this. I was like, wait, what? And so bringing it back to myself for a second. So when I was in college, I thought I may have ADHD myself because I had problems focusing. The issue was that I was having things going on in my personal life that was messing up my ability to be attentive to what I was going through. And so I did seek out a psychiatrist for adult ADD, and it should have been my own experience should have given me skepticism of the disorder. So I went there. The psychiatrist was a wonderful guy, by the way, and his he did a really informal diagnosis of me, and he was like, "Well, we'll we'll just see if it. We're just gonna prescribe you some Ritalin and see if it works." He said, "If the he said he was frank. He was like, look, if the Ritalin works, you have ADHD. If it doesn't work, you don't have it." The problem with that sort of mindset is that, particularly in young people, their behavior can wax and wane in different phases. But just because there's different phases of behavior patterns in younger people doesn't mean that they have a psychiatric disorder. They might go through a phase when they're inattentive and lacking focus, and they might go through a phase when they're hyperactive. They might go through a phase where they find everything boring, or but these shouldn't these normal patterns of behavior phases shouldn't be medicalized, right? And well, suffice to say, the Ritalin didn't work for me. So he prescribed both. He gave me Ritalin and he gave me Concerta. Concerta was like a 12-hour form of Ritalin. It's like an extended release form. It's called Concerta. So he gave me that and then say, okay, use the Ritalin in the evening when you still need to stay sharp. He's like, so the Concerta, he's like, just use that during the day. He's like, but I understand, some people still want to have that level of focus even in the evening. He said, so use this. Now, for most college kids, this would have been a heaven send. The problem was it didn't work for me. It didn't work. And I remember in the early days of Facebook, when Facebook used to be called the Facebook, and it was just for college students, we had a Facebook group for my college. Because again, when it was originally geared towards just college students, every college had like their own private like network on Facebook, right? And then my alma mater, um, there was a group for people who wanted to study, who wanted Ritalin so they could study. And I was about to sell mine. Good thing I didn't because that was, kind of illegal, selling prescription drugs. And someone did offer to buy it from me, but I was like, I felt, my spidey senses were tingling, so I didn't do it. Uh, Cass, so if you use the Ritalin without having ADHD, that would have given you a high, wouldn't it? No, not necessarily. Um, Ritalin, because Ritalin is, they prescribe it to you. It's not gonna. So, so, so it's like, so Ritalin is a synthetic form of speed, right? But the difference is, like street level drugs isn't um, doesn't give you a doesn't give you it's not individually dosed for for a subject, for a patient, right? So where something could be of a very high dose for someone, it could be of a low dose for someone else. He gave me what would have been sufficient just to keep me focused. So it wouldn't have been enough to get me high. So if it didn't work, it just meant that it wouldn't have made any difference in my level of attentiveness. Basically, it wouldn't have gotten me high. That's how I knew it didn't work, because I didn't feel any more focused than usual. And the other thing was, so I came into I came to one of my sessions with him, and I brought a book with me. He said, "Oh, you brought a book." He said, "What did you bring?" And I was like, "Yeah, I'm a nerd. I like to bring books wherever I go." He's like, "Oh, okay." He said, "So what is it?" I was like, "Naming a Necessity" by Saul Kripke. He was like, he gave me the serious look. He was like, "What?" I was like, "Yes." I was like, it's a philosophy book um, by this guy named Saul Kripke. I said he's considered one of the most important philosophers who've ever lived. And I was like, Name and Necessity is sort of like a book on uh, philosophy of language and logic and stuff like that. He gave me this hard look. He was like, someone with ADHD would not be able to read, uh, usually cannot keep a long enough attention to read a book, much less a book like that. I was like, good point. I was like, yeah, so good point. Um, so suffice to say, I did not have the ADHD, but I did have problems concentrating. And what he and I discovered was that it was because of clinical depression, not because of ADHD. And so I'm going to spin this into my critique of clinical depression disorders in a moment. But suffice to say, people suffering from major depressive disorders can also have a lack of concentration and focus as well, which may sometimes be misdiagnosed as ADHD. So let me repeat that for people who aren't aware. So some people suffering from major depressive disorders, and there's many different forms. You have SAD, seasonal affective disorder. You have bipolar disorder, which falls in the depressive disorder spectrum. And there's different types of bipolar, right? Um, then you have unipolar depressive disorders, which is also clinical depression. And, you know, those can all cause issues with concentration and hyperactivity. Okay. Um, but getting back to my critique of ADHD, I am starting to believe that not that there isn't something that causes like problems out there with attentive attentional deficits and stuff like that, but I'm starting to believe it's more of a social contagion than um, than a dis than an own independent disorder, because most of the things that they use to describe the symptoms of attention deficit hyperactivity disorder are usually symptoms that can be subsumed of either under another psychological issue, or it can just be again a part of a regular pattern of young male behavior, hyperactivity, and attentiveness. These can be due to things like boredom, lack of physical activity, things of this nature. And again, as education has been feminized in the United States, because there's less males that teach elementary education, and there's women who don't understand that boys typically won't stay still for a whole 7 to 8 hours without having some sort of release valve, are quicker to say that these kids have ADHD. Cass says, in Australia too, not enough male teachers. Let me get some water. Well, there's a reason that there's not a lot of male teachers in elementary education. One is that there's not much social prestige in teaching, particularly young kids. So guys don't want to do something that lacks prestige, because stuff that lacks prestige is going to keep them from being able to attract women of them for themselves. It's like, becoming a janitor. There's nothing wrong with being a janitor, but it lacks social prestige, right? Who and it's like, who wants to go into debt going into college, getting a 4 year college degree and having to pay back like $50 to $100,000 in student loans just to become a teacher at an elementary school. On top of that, a lot of guys um, aren't having families of their own, so typically don't want to deal with young kids. Not to mention there's a lot of variables involved. Not to mention, a lot of guys don't want to deal with single mothers, who are the mothers of these children. A lot of these children act like pure assholes, and you can't do anything about them. Loneliness, I don't think loneliness in itself is really going to contribute to ADHD. Now, if you're talking about depression, yes, but not ADHD. But again, there there there's more evidence coming about that ADHD is more of a social contagion than its own unique psychiatric disorder. Plus, a lot of the experts from the 90s, who were some of the biggest harbingers of ADHD, are now recanting what they said back then in the 90s and the 2000s. Um, One guy pretty much admitted that he was shilling for the pharmaceutical industry. The ADHD label made the pharmaceutical industry a lot of money by prescribing Ritalin, Adderall, and Strattera. Those were like the three main lines of psychoactive medication used to battle ADHD. One of those diseases where you could just throw a pill at it. Like it was usually again Ritalin, Adderall, or Strattera. Um, and a lot of these mental health experts at the time pimp, basically pimp themselves out to the pharmaceutical industry, made a lot of money, misleading families and making people believe that a lot of children who just suffer from normal boredom had ADHD. Again, if you took those same kids who sit to couldn't sit for like a 2 hour lesson in arithmetic, could sit for like 2 hours and watch a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle movie. Why? Because they had interest in the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle movie, but they didn't have interest in the multiplication tables. So Carlin says, yeah, they were making big bank. Yep. Then there was another expert who was a neuroscientist who was claiming that there was a neurobiological component to ADHD, and now they're saying that's not true. That when you look at those same studies in the long term, so in the short term, yes, they were showing there was differences between groups um, who were labeled suffering from ADHD, who were either taking medication, not taking medication, or people who weren't diagnosed with ADHD. There was a difference, and the problem was when you look at those term when you look at those studies in the long term, all the differences evened out between all three groups. Between the groups with ADHD that were diagnosed and receiving medication, the ADHD group that was diagnosed and not receiving medication, and the group that was not diagnosed with ADHD. The differences, the so-called differences, evened out between all three groups. And so this gets to a point as well. So I'm gonna get a little nerdy with you guys for a second. My, bear in mind, okay, I'm a nerd. So a lot of us who went to higher education know of the 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 education it's basically it's basically like a college catechism at this point. Correlation does not equal causation. And so people will look at the longitudinal studies and say, well, this doesn't show such and such and such and such. Yeah, it does in the long term. Here's why. All right. Thinking caps on, folks. So, first of all, we knew we were shown through correlational studies that smoking causes lung cancer, even though these were correlational studies. Do you know why we could infer causation from smoking to lung cancer for the victims, even though these were correlational studies? It's because some types of correlation, and I'm gonna repeat this. I'm gonna be on my Dr. Umar today, so I'm gonna say this 3 times. Some types of correlation do equal causation. Some types of correlation do equal causation. Some types of correlation do equal causation. What are those kinds? They're called longitudinal correlational studies. Do actually have can actually show causal inference, limited causal inferences. Longitudinal correlational studies do allow you to infer causal causation. Okay. And there's different types of longitudinal correlational studies. We won't have to get into all of them, but there's things called like autoregressive um, correlation. It's a type of longitudinal study. Um, cross uh, cross leg correlate, which is another longitudinal correlational study. Um, and the third one, there's three main types of longitudinal correlational studies, but they do allow limited causal inferences to be made. So it is not true for all the people who always hear saying, well, correlation doesn't equal causation. In longitudinal correlation, it actually does. And anyone who's taken behavioral statistics knows this. So This is how you know people who've actually are, statistically illiterate from those who aren't. Because anyone who isn't statistically illiterate knows that some forms of correlation do actually allow allow you to draw a causal inference, which are longitudinal correlational studies. These longitudinal correlational studies showed that ADHD was the so-called patterns of it even out over time. So again, you had those three groups. Again, you had the ADHD people who were diagnosed and were taking medication. You had ADHD people who weren't taking medication, and you had the ones who weren't diagnosed with ADHD. And when you looked at the longitudinal uh, effects, they evened out. So this neuroscientist later recanted that, yeah, they realized that there aren't differences in the brains of these people with with other normal kids. That looking at them throughout their looking at them throughout the longevity of their life, the brains of the people diagnosed with ADHD were almost completely identical to the people who weren't ever diagnosed with ADHD. How's that? Are we tracking, guys? All right, so moving on to clinical depression. How many of us remember from at least the 90s all these pharmaceutical commercials telling us that depression is the cause of a chemical imbalance in the brain? Do you guys remember that? It's bullshit. It's bullshit. First of all, even when I was in college, we knew there was issues with clinical depression, and this is before I was diagnosed with it. I took my psycho pathology, my well, not my psychopath, yeah, my abnormal psychology class, right? And there's been skepticism for a long time that that was a over that was just really a oversimplification of the complexities of what make up the major depressive disorders, that it was just due to a chemical imbalance. Here's the first thing. For one, um, for mild to moderate forms of depression, it could be treated equally, if not better, just using cognitive therapy, of talk therapy, right? Didn't require any medication, just using cognitive or cognitive behavioral therapy by itself could treat depression. Also, all the different psychoactive forms of medication for depression, antidepressants, don't really work. So you have different types, you have different levels of antidepressants, the SSRIs and the um, the tricyclics and all these other types of antidepressants. But they kind of work in a scatter. They have like a scattershot effectiveness. Scattershot, like if you just you know shoot a shotgun of buckshots at a target. You know, some of them will just hit it just by fiat, right? Uh, that's sort of how these antidepressants work. Also, we come to realize that being uh, being physically active can mediate or treat depression on its own. This is why I always harp a lot on running, particularly running in the morning for people who have mood who need that level of mood stabilization, because we found out that cardio, particularly done in the morning when you wake up, can act as a mood stabilizer in the same way as antidepressants. This is why I run so much myself. This is how I got rid of my own clinical depressions when I started getting physically active again. For a long time, I wasn't physically active in college, and that's when I started to suffer clinical depression. But once I started becoming physically active again, the depression was gone. Uh, Carson says, "Yeah, I remember. I remember." Catherine says medication is a band-aid solution. The root cause of the depression needs to be dealt with, which mostly stems from trauma. Yes and no, Cat. So this is another criticism of the this is a semi-related problem within the mental health industry, which is psychodynamic therapy and other types of therapy which aren't science-based. Basically, the only forms of therapy that are science-based are cognitive therapy, behavioral therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy, and um, some forms of there's a very brief type of psychodynamic therapy called I think it's called individual therapy or something like that. But the problem the problem with a lot of therapy, particularly the psychodynamic or psychoanalytic approaches, is that they look to give you insight into your trauma. But the problem is, the evidence shows that there's no that there the, the evidence doesn't show that there's any actual like curative effects to receiving insight into your trauma. It'll make you feel better, but it's not going to treat the actual problem. This is why this is why cognitive therapy is better, because cognitive therapy doesn't deal with the root causes of your trauma. It just teaches you how to think, and if it's paired with behavioral therapy, teaches you how to think and act more rationally. This is the only science-based approach to it. Shout out to, well, RIP to, Aaron Beck, who I think was the founder of cognitive therapy, or at least one form of important form of cognitive therapy. But it's cognitive behavior therapy is really the only like science-based approach to therapy. Most of them just have what's called the dodo effect, which is just, it basically gives you a sort of a generalized placebo effect from talking with someone about your problems. For that, you could just talk to your barber or your your barber or your your local bartender or whatever, and there'll probably be something of the same effect. But to actually have like some sort of curative sort of treatment effects, really you only get that from either cognitive therapy or medication. Carson says, I had a roommate years ago that had a pill for everything. Oh, that's horrible. These are facts. This is why I run as well. Yeah, this is why I harp on running a lot. This is why you see me in my YouTube shorts talking about running, because running, like I said, running is the king of exercises. Not only does it make you physically fit, but it acts as a mood stabilizer. And I keep telling you, and remember, I keep saying this on my lives as well. A lot of these people who come here late at night talking with me on live and they got mental issues, I always ask them, are they physically active? And almost none of them are. I particularly men. Men will Men are supposed to be physically active. This is why typically men who are very effeminate or have mental health issues, almost none of them are physically fit. You rarely see physically fit men with a lot of psychological issues. He said, I ran today, my mood felt great. That's what's up, bro. Keep it up. I life coach someone, and she has uh, issues, and I keep telling her we're going to get you doing cardio. So it's like I kind of went from being her life coach to her fitness coach, but it's because it's related. I know my niche, so to get in where I fit in, I'm like, look, she wants to she wants to lose, she wants to lose a lot of weight, and she needs more direction in her life, and it's like, so we're gonna get you started running to give you that mood stabilizer and to get you physically fit. And then we deal with her other issues, as they come along as well. But I couldn't preach the effects of running more. Like, people don't understand, and I know some people are gonna say I'm capping here, but people humans literally evolved for distance running. This is how we caught our prey. We would we would literally uh, run our prey to exhaustion and then kill them. Excuse me, unalive them. I don't want to get demonetized. We will unalive our. This is how we've hunted things like the mastodon and the woolly mammoth and the cyber tooth tigers and all these other things. Like, um, we would cause them exhaustion because we evolved for distance running. Like, there's actually like evolutionary history showing in human evolution that we evolved to be distance runners. Like, we're not particularly fast, not particularly agile, but what we can do is we have the stamina to run distances, and we evolve for that. This is why we walk and look a certain way. This is why when we run, we can still maintain our balance. We can still maintain normal vision. A lot of animals cannot maintain normal vision while running over a prolonged distance, nor can they keep a steady like balance and motion. Not like, and this came through and this comes through from the way we stand and our biomechanics. So, like, there's actually in evolutionary biology a theory that, instead of that we evolve to be um thinking man, we kind of evolved to be running man. Like, that is a legit alternative uh theory in biological evolution. But either way, you don't have to take it that far. But we can still say that people definitely evolved for distance running, and this is how our ancestors caught their prey. I forgot the actual term for it, but again, we will hunt animals to they were to they basically we ran them to exhaustion. I forget what you call that. There's an actual biological term for that. Um, but when you take those sort of things away from us that we evolved to do, of course there's going to be issues. One of the again one of the theories in abnormal psychology is a lot of the things we see now as psychiatric disorders may have been things that would have been healthy for our primal ancestors, but for modern humans it wouldn't be. You know, being a psychopath like might have had certain benefits. In earlier times, the guy who could be able to carry out certain uh, serious things like beheading people and stuff like that without losing his lunch probably would have served a purpose in earlier times. Someone who could go to war and not suffer PTSD because he lacked a certain empathy for others to carry out certain deeds that need to be done to keep the peace. But in the modern time, uh, that's not a great characteristic to have unless you work in the corporate world where you could translate that psychopathy to basically destroying other people's lives financially and get paid well for it. And yes, I'm not joking. There are a lot of people, successful executives in the corporate world, who have psychopathic tendencies. Look it up. But getting back to where I was originally saying, so the whole idea that there was taught in the 90s and 2000s that clinical depression is a matter of chemical imbalance is bullshit. Now, depression is a real disorder. That's not so. Unlike ADHD, we're not saying that depression isn't a legit disorder. Now, with ADHD, I'm saying that it's mostly a social contagion. Social contagion is another way of talking about uh, somatic disorders. Somatic disorders are psychological disorders that seem to be to, that are purely psychological but seem to have an organic cause. That's why I call somatic disorder. Soma meaning soma being meaning body, but um, you know, it seems to be more of a social contagion than a legit disorder in itself. And the symptoms of ADHD don't help the cause because these are symptoms they could be just prescribed to people who are bored or lack attention for many reasons. Whereas clinical depression seems to be may be a more complex thing. Like it was so much so like with ADHD that they tried to make it sound like it had a legit biological component when it didn't. Like they were legitimately saying that it seemed to be caused by a single gene and other stuff. And anyone who knows anything about behavioral research knows that there's almost no behavioral pattern that's caused by a single gene. Like behavioral patterns are complex and usually come rise from um, a bunch of genes working in conjunction with each other. It's simply not the case in behavioral genetics that usually a single gene would lead to the rise of something as complex as ADHD. That just doesn't make sense. Regardless, there's a lot of CEOs are psychopaths. Yeah, I mean, this is why American Psycho appeals. The movie American Psycho actually appeals to a lot of a lot of people in the corporate world and Wall Street. And the director of the movie is actually mad that a lot of people on Wall Street actually embrace the character. I was like, they embrace the character because they see themselves in him. A lot of the patterns that he has in the movie lead to success in that world. Minus the actual like chopping people up. But other than that, yeah, a lot of his patterns of behavior are things that guys in that industry would embrace. Duh. So it doesn't help the director is some feminist, but whatever. Get him off of that. So again, uh, depression is unlikely just due to a chemical imbalance in the brain because we have yet to find any sort of antidepressant that specifically addresses depression. It seems to be a sort of scattershot effect that, let's try this tricyclic. Oh, that doesn't work. All right, let's try this SSRI. Oh, that doesn't work. All right, well, um, SSRI, for those who don't know, stands for selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor, meaning it inhibits the reuptake of serotonin uh, between brain cells. Anyway, um, then you have the newer line of antidepressants, the uh, the dopaminergic, dopam. Am I saying that right? Dopaminergic medications. Anyway, like Wellbutrin. That's the one I took. Wellbutrin. I took Wellbutrin XL, which was the extended length form of Wellbutrin because it could last 12 hours. And it worked. But it worked just as well as that Wellbutrin? Me going out to run every morning and having a social life. That worked. So, and again, people have fared just as well just doing cognitive therapy as opposed to taking medication. So it can't be just a chemical imbalance if you can address the same problem with cognitive therapy. You know what I'm saying? And and there's other there's a lot of, like I said, there's a lot of BS in the psychiatric world. They like to say, well, we're not an exact science. When you hear, anytime you hear an expert in any field say, well, we're not an exact science, that's another way of saying there's a lot of junk science in what they do. Not pseudoscience. There's a difference between pseudoscience and junk science. Pseudoscience is something that's just been complete. It is like a method of study that's been completely falsified. Junk science uh, deals in legit scientific processes, but their methodology is questionable. Okay. Um, Sorry, I'm just shifting gears here. But psychiatry seems to fit that. Like I said, the fact that they can prescribe an exact medication and just say, well, if it works, then you have the disease. If it doesn't work, you don't have the disease, like with the ADHD with me. That should not be how it works. That shouldn't be how it works. It shouldn't be, oh, well, if it works, you got it. If it doesn't work, you don't got it. Could you imagine? Could like could you imagine that with any other sort of medical illness, guys? Like seriously, could you imagine someone saying, "Well, if if these statins work for you, you have heart disease. If these statins don't work for you, you don't have heart disease." Could you imagine that? Or um, someone saying for diabetes, "Well, if the insulin shots work for you, then you have diabetes. If the insulin shots don't work for you, then you don't have diabetes." Could you imagine saying that? Like, do you does that not sound ridiculous? We should not allow a lack of rigor in mental health that we wouldn't allow when it comes to medical health. What's also what's also crazy about that is psychiatrists are medical doctors, so they should be the ones who are the most skeptical of these sort of things. Now, I think biopsychiatrists are, that is a subfield of psychiatry that takes longer to do. So, just in case people are confused between psychologists and psychiatrists, let me break this down for you because this is something I had to learn. So, you're going to learn it. And I'm not trying to speak down to anyone like you guys are dumb or anything, but a lot of people actually genuinely don't know this. Seriously. So, psychologists are PhD level scientists whose background is in psychology, and they go on to do a doctorate either in clinical psychology or counseling psychology or school psychology. And they usually have to be APA, which is American Psychological Association, not to be confused with the other APAs. There's many APAs out there, but we're talking about the American Psychological Association. They're the largest governing body for professional and scientific psychologists. Then there's the their rival, the APS, which is the Association for Psychological Science. They were once a part of the APA, and they broke away from APA because they thought that the APA cared more about um, cared more about the practice of clinical psychology than scientific psychology. But both the APA and the APS can board certify people for clinical practice. So typically, to be a licensed practicing board certified psychologist, you have to go through the APA or the APS, and you are awarded either a PhD or a PsyD, or you can practice with a master's if you get a master's in clinical social work. So someone with a master's in clinical social work can also do can is also considered a clinical psychologist as well, or counseling psychologist. After they do their social work, they do like a uh, an extended. They do an extra year just dealing in some sort of therapeutic approach. Whereas the PhD level psychologist or PsyD um, typically will do their training in in not only learning therapeutic approaches and working with clients, but they learn the research. They learn how to diagnose, test, and research in those in clinical and counseling psychology. A psychiatrist is a medical doctor, an MD or a DO. The DO stands for Doctor of Osteopathic Medicine. A DO is basically the same as an MD, but less prestigious. So anyway, so an MD or a DO can then, once they've gotten their MD, go on to do a residency in psychiatry. And usually most psychiatric approaches are heavily dependent on the psychodynamic or Freudian sorts of views, which have been largely falsified. Like in scientific psychology, we see psychoanalysis as pseudoscience. However, people outside of psychology still think psychoanalysis is a actual like legit uh, field of research. It is not. Psychoanalysis has been falsified and is conclusively seen as a pseudoscience within scientific psychology. However, too many psychologists still have a reliance on psychoanalytic or psychodynamic approaches. Psychodynamic is just a more general version of psychoanalysis. Traditional psychoanalysis is much more specific than psychodynamic. To become a psychoanalyst, not only did a psychiatrist have to do a residency in psychiatry, then they had to go on and do a uh, postgraduate work after their residency in psychiatry and psychoanalysis, where to become a psychoanalyst, they had to undergo psychoanalysis themselves. So they had to undergo psychoanalysis and be trained in it at the same time. So typically, your typical psychoanalysis, seriously, because I mean, it already takes 4 years to do med school because you do 3 years of med, 1 year of your internship, then you do your residency, and your the length of your residency depends on what you decide to take up, whether psychiatry, internal medicine, OBGYN, gastroenterology, whatever. Like the residency depends on the length of that depends on whatever subfield of medicine you decide to take up. A lot of people just go into internal medicine because that doesn't take that long to do, and you can come out and start coming and go into work as a family physician or something like that. But anyway, um, so the psychiatrist already has the background as a doctor, and they learn these psychodynamic approaches as well as learning how to do the testing and diagnoses of for uh, for uh, for psychiatric treatment. Um, And of course, there's a battle between the master's level clinical social worker, the PhD psychologist, and the MD level psychiatrist over who who gets to do what. I won't even get into that here. That's a topic for another day. But suffice to say, that's the difference between the three. In case people wanted to know, Retro says all psychology degrees are BS. Yeah, well, that's false. Just because you didn't amount to anything in your life doesn't mean that their degrees work only good at idolatry. You're basically just projecting your own inability to do anything with your life onto others. So sorry. Anywho, moving on. Yeah, and I'm pretty frank. I'm gonna be blunt with people. Come here trolling. Yeah. And of course, with clinical psychology, there's many different fields within clinical psychology. You have clinical psychologists. It kind of breaks down to how your managed care deals with it. Your managed care companies, your MCOs or your HCOs, trust me, they hate managed care. Like, as a if you ever want to sit down and hear a long, drawn out complaint, ask a ask a psychologist about dealing with managed care, man. But anyway, so typically, mm, they would deal in the diagnosis and testing and treatment. Carlos is Retro's one of those out of shape guys who don't run. Probably they people like him. They run their mouths. That's what they're good at. They can run their mouths. That's pretty much all they can do. They come online and they'll never run in real life, but they can run their mouth online all day long. Run their mouth and run their fingers to their mouth with food. But in any case, uh, but yeah. So where am I? So typically with managed care, this is how it's going to break down if you seek treatment. So you go seeking treatment, and you'll go see a clinical psychologist who will do your testing and diagnosis. And then once that is done, then they will refer you to maybe a clinical social worker who will give you psychotherapy, and then they will refer you to a psychiatrist who will prescribe you medication. Now, the beef between these three people is that the psychiatrist thinks he can do all three. The clinical psychologist can do two of the three, but thinks that maybe the medication isn't necessary, or that on some level, a clinical psychologist should be able to prescribe medicine. And there were, in a limited time in the army, there was a time where there was a program for military psychologists to be able to prescribe psychoactive medication, but that program was ended. And ever since they ran that program, there has been clinical psychologists lobbying the government, saying we should be able to prescribe medication just like psychiatrists, because we have a better understanding of the mind than psychiatrists who only do like a 4-year residency, where we our whole background is in this. And then there's the the master's level clinical social workers, psychologists, who are saying, well, hey, we could do some testing too. Like, no, you can't. So everyone shits on the master's level, and then the psychiatrist, he shits on the clinical psychologist, saying they can't prescribe medicine. And they're saying, well, we could do all three. We don't need these other folks. Then the clinical psychologist is like, yeah, but we specialize in testing, because a lot of clinical psychologists, in order to keep the doors open, have to specialize in something. So after they do their PhD, most of them go on to do some sort of um, postdoctoral work, um, specialization, that is. Like, some will go into neuropsychological testing. So these are the people that might run testing for like neuropsychological batteries for like certain intellectual disabilities or testing for schools. You have clinical psychologists who work in forensic psychology. So these are the ones who you'll see in the courtrooms being able to diagnose people to see if they can stand trial, or if these are people who should be put in a mental health facility instead of in prison. So that's a specialization of clinical psychology. Um, and you have other specializations too. Okay. Uh, but like I said, the problem with psychiatry again is that there's too much junk science involved, because there's still an element of psychoanalysis involved in psychiatry. The most the most rigorous form of psychiatry is called biopsychiatry, which is different from clinical psychiatry. Biopsychiatry, again, they go on to do their residency in psychiatry, and then they do go beyond that to do a specialization, which is sort of uh, working with the brain. So they go on to do like some aspects of neuroscience as well. So um, they're probably the most rigorous. The only problem with them is sometimes, you know, when you're a hammer, everything you see, it looks like a nail. So that's sort of the problem with biopsychiatry, is that for them everything they see when it comes to mental health is always a brain issue for them, which may or may not be true. But even if it is a biological component, doesn't mean that that's all that there is, which is the whole problem with the whole chemical imbalance theory of clinical depression, is that it was just a chemical imbalance in the brain, and it's just simply not true. um, or just try to reduce everything to the synapses between brain cells. Like there was actually a neuroscience book written about 25 years ago called this. I think it's called The Synaptic Self, written by a neuroscientist, that basically reduces all of human behavior to the to the neurochemical activity between the synapses and brain cells, between the neurons. The synapses are the parts are these extensions of the neurons that connect with each other to allow communication between the cells through electrochemical signals, either through the release of neurotransmitters and electrical signals between these brain cells that cause an excitation down the length of the neural axon. The axon is like a tail of on the brain cell. The axon, which goes down to these synapses where they release chemicals, neurotransmitters in the space between the synapses, which is taken up by the synapse of another neuron. Inhibitors who's from being released and shared across these synaptic gaps. And there was one neuroscientist who went so far to say that, yeah, all basically all human behavior that reduces to the synapses. That is a that is a that is definitely a oversimplification of the complexity of human behavior. But it is an interesting book in itself. I should actually buy it, because I meant to buy it a long time ago. I completely forgot. I might have to go ahead and buy that book now that I reminded myself of it. Sorry, I'm a nerd. But in any case, guys, again, the mental health industry has a lot of problems, because one, you have you have the pharmaceutical companies, which stand to make millions, if not billions, of dollars by psychoactive medications being prescribed to people as a miracle for any sort of problem they have. And they even became to a point, like even recently, that if you complain to a physician about generally any sort of mental distress, they'll just prescribe you a antidepressant. This happened to me just a few years ago because, as I was telling you guys about the drug called Provigil, which can be used to keep people up all night so they can study or work. And so college students were using it. Um, I tried to get that prescribed to me because I was telling them, hey, I actually do have problems with shift work sleep disorder because, and I wasn't actually lying because at the time, you know, I was both working, uh, I was working, doing therapy, and I was commuting. I had these long commutes. I wasn't driving, and so I was basically gone all day long. I'll be gone from like hmm, maybe 7 a.m. to 12 a.m. at night. And by the time, and mind you, by the time I got home at 12 a.m., I hadn't even eaten dinner yet. So I had to eat dinner, but I still wanted to get up and run. So I would get up around 5:30 in the morning to go run, and then immediately afterwards get ready to go off to do the therapy, do my go to work, and there was a time lap between work and my therapy, but I couldn't come back home because like again I wasn't driving, so this took up my entire day. The commute between between getting to the therapy, getting to work because there was like a few hours between therapy and work, so I would just go to the mall for a few hours and dick around and go to work, which took like an hour or so to like to get there from the mall, and then took almost 2 hours to get back home. And so I was suffering. So I told the doctor this, and she just prescribed me some antidepressant to help me go to sleep. I'm like, no, I need the opposite of that. I don't have a problem going to sleep. I have a problem staying up. Um, but it's like, so that was a general problem is that doctors today will just throw antidepressants at people for any minor dissatisfaction in their lives instead of just actually listening to them saying, Doc, look, this is what's going on. Like, I understand your basic family physician or internist is not trained to deal with psychiatric issues. Now, mind you, they all have to do like some coursework in psychiatry, but they don't do a residency in it unless again they become psychiatrists. It would have made more. It would make more sense for these internists, family physicians, pediatricians to instead of just immediately writing a prescription for an antidepressant to someone who's complaining of some sort of mental distress to say, let me refer you to speak to someone about that. That would be much better than just simply saying, uh, here you go, take this and get that prescription. It's like, yeah, I really didn't need a prescription for what's a whatever they give you like some Valium or something, whatever common antidepressant you can think of. Instead of just listening to what you actually are complaining about and saying, you know what, let me refer you to someone. How hard is that? It would be just as quick as them writing a prescription. This is writing your referral. But because depressants are overprescribed, it leads to this problem of clinical depression being seen as just merely a chemical imbalance in the brain. Like you can just change from sad to happy just like that. It's not. That's not how it works. It's simply not. And the fact that you can see almost immediate results just by doing cardio in the morning, uh, if you, sorry, I'm still eating some more Pocky. If you can alter your mood through physical activity as opposed to putting psychoactive medication into your body that has side effects. Wouldn't it behoove you to just do to become physically active instead? Change this. Sorry, I'm messing with the chat filter, guys. Give me 1 second. All right. But and that gets to my one of my last critiques is that we know, particularly for men, and I'm not discriminating against you ladies watching this, but it particularly for men, we find that psychotherapy is less effective for us because we're more physical. Guys are going to be more likely to be so better well adjusted by becoming physically active than going to therapy, particularly men who are more traditional. Men who are more masculine or more traditional are going to get less out of psychotherapy than women or men who are less men who who are more feminine. Carson says, unfortunately, people are too lazy to run. Oh, I know, brother. I, I try to tell people to run all the time, and they don't listen to me. This is why I don't like giving free advice. I have a very good friend, and I've been telling him for years to run, and he won't do it. And he even tells me, "Yeah, I know, I'm just being lazy." And I'm like, "Bruh, like if you really want to lose those pounds, work like run." I was like, "Going to the gym is good, but like you can lift weights and it still is not going to get you to where you need to be physically as running would, like not just cardio but running specifically. Like it is the king of exercises because it confers so many benefits. Like ideally you should do both running and strength training and weight training, right? But we all have busy lives, so it's like if I can only do one or the other, I'm going to choose running because it's going to confer the most overall benefits to me. So, but yeah, people are way too lazy to run, and even the gym bros. You see my YouTube shorts. Like I've talked to gym bros hate running because they have this they believe this myth that running is going to cost them their gains, and that's just completely false. And it's like I think most of them just say that as an excuse so they don't have to run. They'll say, "Oh, I ain't trying to run. It's going to eat away at my gains." No, it won't. And I was like, that it's funny that this myth has stayed around so long, despite the fact that we've known for decades that that's not true. Because, like I said, I mentioned Arnold Schwarzenegger. Arnold Schwarzenegger won Mr. Olympia 7 times, 7 times, and he is the prototype. When most people think of bodybuilders, even today, people think of Arnold Schwarzenegger, even though he doesn't look like that way anymore. Most people still think Arnold Schwarzenegger when they think who is the prototype of a bodybuilder. But guess what? It's like Schwarzenegger used to do running and cardio as part of his bodybuilding routine, and this is not, and also not, and and Schwarzenegger was physically fit because even before he started bodybuilding, he used to be a power lifter, and people know that powerlifting is a complete different set of skills than bodybuilding. Bodybuilding is just aesthetically making yourself look good. Powerlifting, you're actually strong. This is why he used to always show those feats of strength in his early movies when he had to lift something heavy. He was really doing it just to show how actually strong he is. But this guy used to do running and cardio as part of his routine. Now he didn't do it every day, of course, but he made it part of his bodybuilding routine. And when he was on his off season, he did more running and cardio than when he was training for his to to win his titles. So in between winning his titles, when he was off season, he did even more running and cardio. So it's like, if this is good enough for a guy with 7 Mr. Olympia titles, how is it not good enough for you, Joe Schmo, who goes to the gym like 3 or 4 times a week? Like, please. Is that bad diet can lead to depression? Absolutely. That's another scam. What we can talk about maybe in another live is how the food industry in America leads to bad health in America. They want look, it's almost to a point where they want people to be in bad health. They want you to sit there and be on social media all day, eating bad food and not exercising and being effeminate men. That's what, like, the powers that be um benefit from weak men. And this is why so many people, I don't want to get political in this live, but this is why so many people reject this red pill stuff, this MAGA stuff, this manosphere stuff, because they're going against the grain. They're saying, you guys are supposed to be men. You're supposed to be masculine. Masculinity is not toxic. Like, and I'm serious, like, eh, 5 years ago, they were literally saying that men who go to the gym are white supremacists or bigots. I'm like, seriously? So now me going to the gym makes me a white supremacist? All right, fine. I guess I'm just a white supremacist now, because apparently you can't go to the gym. Like, this is the nonsense we hear in the mass media and in social media, is that they don't want men to be masculine. They want them to be gay. They want them to be effeminate. They want them to be unhealthy. Carson says the gym bros avoid running it like it's the play. Yeah. Now, a few of them, I will say, not all gym bros. Now, there's some who I will see. Usually, they'll do their weights, and then they'll get on the treadmill for like, you know 10-20 minutes. So I salute those guys, because at least they're putting in the effort. Um, for me, however, I prefer to do my cardio in the beginning and then do my weights, because you're by the time you because by the time you run after you do the weights, you're going to be exhausted, because you've already used up your ATP and all that good stuff. But, well, unless you're taking some creatine. However, but creatine doesn't help with cardiovascular exercises, unfortunately, except for hit training. Like, it works for like something like hit training, but that's because hit training is more. It's not typical cardio. But anyway, who hit? Hold up. I didn't. For some reason, the algorithm hid your last comment, Carlton. I didn't do that. I just deleted this other clown who was saying something weird, Benjamin Robinson or whatever. But you had another message that, for some reason, the filter messed up. I didn't do that. Okay, just to let you know. But Cardin says, back in the '60s, you didn't see a lot of overweight people in those civil rights protests. Fast forward to the BLM protests, everyone is obese. Right? They're all obese. They all got they all got the septum nose rings and blue and purple hair. They're fat. Um, and like I said, for people who travel, like when you go to a lot of countries outside of the U.S., particularly non-Western countries, you don't see a lot of fat people who are poor, who unless they're rich. poor people aren't fat in third world countries. Just gonna say that when you are on the streets, or if you are in uh, financial, if you're in dire straits financially, typically you are not fat. That only happens here in America, where the where you actually have to have money to have access to fresh foods. Over there, you have to have money to go to McDonald's and go to these fast food places because it's more expensive there. So people are more likely to eat wholesome. Yeah, a lot of people in the 60s were more physically active too. Like I said, there was more emphasis on physical education and up until, like I said, the 2000s, where you started seeing them phasing out arts, music, physical education, um, tech ed. Like most places don't have tech ed anymore, don't have home ec, um, sex ed. Like these are things we all got to do, at least in my time, in middle school and high school. We still had tech ed, still had home ec, still had sex ed, still had physical ed, still had art, still had music. So, Carlin says, I wonder how people deal with depression in third world countries. Oh, I can tell you how they don't. They don't. Um, just like in Black and in Latino communities here in America, over in most underdeveloped countries, most people don't deal with psychological health at all. Like you, people are like so. Now, let's take Japan for instance. Now, Japan is considered a westernized nation in the sense that it's not underdeveloped country, but it's like both. It has a step, and it has one foot in the east, one foot in the west. It's the best way I can describe Japan. Now, there are there's a mental health industry there, but it's limited because in a lot of these collectivist cultures don't they don't deal in mental health. Like they think it's something that is would bring shame on the family to admit someone's dealing with something. So you have a particular psychiatric disorder only known in Japan, although it's now known more generally in East Asia, called hikikomori, which there's no direct comparison to any psychological problem here, but it's mostly, but it is most is very much like here, people who are agoraphobics, who have agoraphobia, people who are scared. Agoraphobia means fear of the marketplace in Greek, right? But it generally talks to people who are shut-ins, who are scared to leave the home. This is what hikikomori people deal with, but it's more complicated because they it's not necessarily they're scared to go. Well, they might be scared to go out, like get extreme discomfort from leaving their homes. But like typically, they might not even leave their bedroom. They'll just stay in their bedroom, and their family will just bring them food to their rooms. And they will interact with people only like through like the internet or something like that. And typically, they are dealing with depressive uh, issues with clinical depression and stuff like that. So, like I said, it's not a one-to-one translation to any Western labeling of a psychiatric disorder like agoraphobia or clinical depression because it sort of combines both. But like I said, it's a little bit worse. Like an agoraphobic might be someone who can still like walk around their building or their home or whatever, but they don't want to step outside. Whereas someone who have hikikomori may probably won't even leave their bedroom. Like they might leave their bedroom to like go wash up if they do. Like if they do that, like sometimes their family has to literally like force them to go bathe. But like other than bathing, like they typically won't even leave their bedroom. Like their family literally just brings up meals to them. And because they would bring shame on their families to admit that their kid, or sometimes adults, are dealing with are shut-ins and won't do anything, like it becomes this quiet hush hush thing, like they won't, you know it usually doesn't come become known to the public until something bad happens, right? The person does something dank does something violent to another family member, or they do some sort of self-harm to themselves, or something like that, or they make some sort of online they ask for some sort of help online. But in third world countries, and generally in non-westernized, not just third world countries, but generally any country that's not westernized in the sense of the UK, US, Canada, or Australia, they kind of just try to ignore mental health, thinking it will just go away on its own, or that it's just a lack of willpower and stuff like that. And it's a very unhealthy attitude towards mental health, because we um in health education and in psychology generally, we look at health as a multifaceted thing. You got physical health, you got mental health, you have social health, right? You have financial health, and you have spiritual health, or what might some people might call the holistic approach to health. Because I remember P, we had to climb a rope, right? What movie was I just watching where the kid? I can't remember what I was watching, and they had to motivate the person to climb up the rope. But yeah, like we had to do gym. That look, the like Jerry Seinfeld made fun of this on one of his shows. He was like, he's like, how is it like, in school? He said, you would go to English, then you would go to PE, where you're basically like Lord of the Flies for a whole hour, and then you go to math class like none of that just happened. Like you were just hanging onto the rope, climbing up a rope, and hanging on for dear life. Go back to math. Then you go to math class afterwards, pretend like none of that just didn't happen. But that's the exact thing that boys need. You can't sit there and say, "Well, these kids can't sit still." They're not supposed to sit still for 8 hours, especially in elementary school. But like I said, some elementary schools, and someone doubted me early on in the chat room, and that's their problem, because yes, there literally are schools that no longer have gym, or they don't have gym every day. We had gym every day, and we had recess every day, unless it was bad weather. When it was bad weather, what they instead for recess, they would let us watch a movie. They are, they remember how they, the favorite time in class, during the school, is when they hauled in the uh the big TV with the VCR. Everyone was happy, like when a teacher decided to just show us a movie that day, or there was a substitute, and they rolled in the big TV with the VCR. You're like, oh, what we about to watch? Uh-oh, about to watch, you know, I don't know, some sort of Disney movie or something. Usually it was a Disney movie. Again, I'm speaking to my age. This is the 80s, early 90s, whatever. But yeah, um, or it was like a family a, a, a family rated action flick, like Back to the Future or something, right? But anyway, so when we didn't have recess, then we will watch a movie, because like maybe it was a thunderstorm outside or something. So they like, well, kids can't go outside, but we're gonna watch a movie. So we watch a movie or something. But yeah, we because kids got to release all that energy, because kids have a lot of pent up energy, we could focus. We could do arithmetic. We could do grammar. We could do literature. We could do history. We could do science, because we got two outlets to release their energy. We had recess and we had gym. A lot of schools don't have that, and people who doubted me, I mean, just go online or look up the stats. I'm not making these things up. I don't say things just to make things up. Carson says kind of reminds me of the movie Surrogates with Bruce Willis. Joseph, what's going on tonight, brother? What's up? Carson says the metaverse would be perfect for those people. Well, for the hikikomori, no. If you're talking about for the hikikomori, I don't think so. Because again, the problem is they need to go offline and get outside. And the problem with these people is the only social interactions they have with people are online, usually through video games. Like they'll probably play like they usually like in. And I don't want to be too stereotypical, but typically like these kids suffering from hikikomori. Like I said, it used to be just known in Japan. Now it's becoming a wider known phenomenon throughout East Asia. Like they'll be shut-ins, and their only social interactions usually through like video games or social media, if that. And the very thing they need to do is unplug and go outside and interact with people, like socially, like physically. Um, but the metaverse, I think, would just kind of would just reinforce those that that behavior of li- just living in a digital world. I think that's the exact thing we don't need them to do. For instance, we know that a lot of these tech giants in Silicon Valley and other places, despite many of them being the inventors of things like the metaverse and you know Instagram and Snapchat, Facebook, and all these other sorts of platforms, many of them send their kids to private schools where the private schools are low tech, meaning that the kids aren't taught to be using like uh, digital software at a young age. And it makes sense too because almost every pediatrician, psychiatrist, clinical psychologist, and physician tells people not to let their kids um, get a lot of screen time before the ages, typically before the age of 6, because it causes attentional problems because their brain is still wiring, and when they're um, getting a lot of screen time, whether on a tablet, a TV, a TV monitor, video games, all that sort of stuff, it screws with their the proper wiring of their brain. So um, and even now in China, they actually made it a law that kids can only have a certain amount of time every day online, and it automatically cuts them off. Some parents are mad about that because it takes the decision away from them. Where a lot of other parents are happy because a lot of them feel that they can't control what their kids do. So China has stepped in and said, "Nope, you get 2 hours of screen time. That's it. That's all." Maybe we need to start doing that in other countries. I mean, it's very. I know it's a very parochial stance, and generally I'm anti-parochial when it comes to like government interfering in our daily lives. But when it comes to stuff like hikikomori, people being agoraphobic, being shut-ins, being socially social anxiety, the rise in autism, and all this other sort of stuff, maybe there should be some intervention when necessary. Maybe. Red Scorpion said even, but I hope you had a good Easter weekend. Yeah, my Easter weekend was also uh coincided with Superman Day, so that was cool. Although I didn't, I didn't go to the comic book store for Superman Day because I'm pretty sure they had some cool stuff to give out. Although I did buy something, I got the remember the McNugget buddies. So these originally came out in the '90s, and I missed it in the '90s, and they keep bringing them back. So the last time they brought it back was 2 years ago with the Kerwin. What was his name? Kerwin Frost. So I bought one of these. I ordered it online and got it today. I ordered it Friday on Good Friday, so it was a Good Friday. So I got this today on Easter Monday. Well, unfortunately, our Pope died. For well, I'm not Catholic, but he is the Pope. So the Pope Francis died today, earlier today. Well, yesterday now because it's past midnight, Easter Monday. But other than that, it was a cool weekend. Didn't do anything. Stayed inside all weekend. Not literally inside, like shut-ins, like those hikokomoris I just talked about. Like I do go out every day to run and other stuff, of course. But I ordered this 2023. This was like one of the first adult Happy Meals, the Kerwin Frost meal, when he developed his own um, different McNugget buddies. So I got this. So this is probably one of the last of the McDonald meals that I missed that I got. So I got this. I got the classic Super Mario 3 from 1989, I think. I got the old Muppet Baby Kermit. I got the Pokemon, several Pokemon Happy Meals. So I'm doing good. So yeah, I'm a nerd, guys. I'm a geek. So and I still buy Happy Meals too. But this was the adult Happy Meal this came with. I think it was the first adult Happy Meal. I have to look it up. He said the big TV with the VCR. You know what I'm talking about, man. The big TV with the VCR. That was the best time in school. Oh other than recess and pizza day. Well, whenever there was pizza day at lunch, that was the best. However, when I was living in Chicago, they had we had some really good meals for kids. Like that was the first time I ever had a gyro or gyro, whichever way you prefer to pronounce it. I was told by Greek people you actually pronounce it gyro, but a lot of people just say gyros, whatever. But I first had uh, the gyro sandwiches in junior high school or middle or either junior high or elementary school, whichever. Then there's of course the pizza, the little rectangle pizza. Love that. Shit, I'm making myself hungry. um, of course the chicken. Um, what else did we have? We had the taco. We used to have the tacos with the hard shells. So certain lunch days were the best. The big T the days when they brought in the big TV with the VCR was the best. Uh, when we got to incubate some chicken eggs and they hatched and became chicks. Like we got chicken eggs. Then our other our other class they got duck eggs, so they got to raise little ducklings. And we got chickens, so that was cool. Uh, yeah, don't send me down memory lane with all these member berries. Risk says I remember in the mornings we had a small breakfast and watched cartoons. Did we have breakfast? All right, it was one school we did have like a breakfast meal, but most of my schools we didn't. So yeah, you probably were in a preschool program. Yeah, that's what I think I did. We had that too. I think I was in a preschool program. Now I was in an after school program in elementary school, um, where after which was for it was a place where basically they babysat the kids until parents could come pick them up after they came off of work. But it was cool. Like we had video games. We could watch TV. We could go outside and play tetherball or basketball. We had tons of toys. Like the after school program was the shit. And we would get a snack. Elementary school in St. Louis. Okay, yeah, mine was in in Illinois, like not in Chicago, but like in a no name place people never heard of, University Park. Um, but anyway, so I'm about to go. I'm losing my voice and it's late and I'm hungry. I'm gonna keep snacking. Matter of fact, I got a pack of Easter Swedish fish candy I'm about to eat. So yeah, I'm about to go. But yeah, I just wanted to talk on the to reiterate what I was talking about earlier. That there's a lot of there's a that people should be very skeptical of mental health experts. Not I'm not saying be skeptical of psychology or of cognitive science or even of psychiatry itself, but you should be skeptical of some of the experts in that field when they start um, being proponents of ideas that run counter to decades of what we know when it comes to children and mental health. Like I said, the ADHD thing was a farce. It, I am skeptical that it is a genuine disorder. I think it's more of a social contagion, which is the nice way of termed we call it now, social contagions. Um, and the way that clinical depression was just seen as a chemical imbalance in the brain. Both of these sorts of ideas, the ADHD was the ADHD was a genuine psychiatric disorder with a biological basis, and that ADHD could just be reduced to a chemical imbalance in the brain. These both benefited the pharmaceutical industry, and health experts that touted these ideas were well paid to do so. And I could say the same for things like gender affirming care, which is just bullshit. Gender affirming care doesn't even make sense. This is why gender ideology is incoherent. How can something that is a social construct need correction through a medical treatment? That doesn't make sense. A social construct is something that's not considered exactly real. So if something is not exactly real, it's just a social construct, why would it need to be treated through biomedical approaches? That doesn't make sense. Um, but we can save that for another day. So one more beer before I crash out. It'll take it easy, man. All right, but I'm gone, guys. If anyone else did have any other comments, though, do leave it in my comment section. And if anyone um, can, please, you send me any. You can donate to me through the super chat, through Cash App, or buy me a coffee. But I appreciate the conversation, and I might have to continue this more as well. But again, for a reference point for some of you guys, go to the New York Times article that came out um, about 2 weeks ago, where it discusses that a lot of people were misled about ADHD. They'll kind of go into more about that. Also, Matt Walsh from the Daily Wire talks about this as well. For some of you who don't mind, reading stuff from that political view. If not, and if you're someone who leans more to the left or in the liberal side of things, the New York Times article is for you. If you're someone who leans to the right, maybe the article by Matt Walsh from the Daily Wire might appeal more to you. But but it's saying something that both of them are saying the same thing, both from the New York Times and the Daily Wire. So I'll leave you guys with that. Talk to you later.